I've been thinking about something lately, and I think a lot of people our age probably feel this, even if they don't really talk about it. Look, we grew up being taught a certain way to live. You know what I mean, right? You went to school, you got a good job, you worked hard, you showed up on time, you didn't complain too much, you paid your bills, you tried to put a little bit of money away, and eventually, if you did all that long enough, things were supposed to work out. That was pretty much the deal. And for our parents, in a lot of cases, that deal actually worked. Not perfectly, mind you, but it worked, right? You could get a decent job, stay there for 20 or 30 years, maybe even have a pension, pay off your house, and eventually retire. And I think a lot of us Gen Xers grew up believing that if we just followed that same path, we'd be all right as well. But somewhere along the way, the rules changed, and nobody really sat us down and told us that. That's the part I've been thinking about. Because you can do everything you were told to do and still look at your life in your 40s or 50s and think, how am I still worried about money? How am I still this busy? Why does retirement still feel so far away? Why am I earning more money right now than I did 20 years ago, but somehow it doesn't feel like I'm that much further ahead? And I don't think that means that we did anything wrong. I think we were trained for a world that changed underneath us. That's all. Look at job security. Years ago, getting a good job meant something different. People actually talked about getting a job for life. Think about that phrase, right? A job for life? You almost don't hear that anymore. Think about it. Companies merge, companies downsize, technology changes jobs, departments disappear, people get replaced, entire industries change, and sometimes somebody who gave 20 years to a company gets called into a room one afternoon and suddenly they're looking for work again. That's a different world. And when you're 25, starting over is one thing. But when you're 55, that feels a little different. Look, you've got responsibilities, you've built a life, you probably have a mortgage or rent, maybe aging parents, maybe kids, maybe even grandkids. You've got car payments, insurance, groceries that somehow seem to cost more every time you walk into the store. Life is already moving. So this idea that our financial security should depend completely on one employer, I don't know. I think we need to rethink that. And notice what I'm not saying, right? I'm not saying everybody should quit their job tomorrow. Actually, I think that would be a terrible piece of advice for most people. Look, your job may be the thing that's paying the bills right now, and there's nothing wrong with that, nothing whatsoever. What I'm talking about is having another option, something besides the job. Because one of the biggest lessons that I've learned over the years is that one source of income can also mean one point of failure. Now, if everything depends on that one paycheck, then whoever controls the paycheck has a lot of control over your life. Now, not because they're bad people, that's just how the arrangement works. And I think that's worth thinking about. Another thing that changed is how we make money. Now, this one fascinated me because most of us were raised with a very simple equation. Time equals money. You work 1 hour, you get paid for 1 hour, right? You work 8 hours, you get paid for 8 hours. Maybe you work overtime and make a little more, but the connection is always there, right? Your time creates money, and that's great, right? Except there's one problem. We don't have so much time, right? There's only 24 hours in a day. That's it. Nobody gets 30, nobody gets 40 hours. So if the only way you can increase your income is by working more hours, eventually you hit a wall. There's no more time to sell. And I think this is where the internet changes things in a really interesting way. Because now you can create something once and have it continue working after you're finished creating it. And a video is a simple example, right? You can make a video today, Maybe it takes a half hour. Maybe it takes an hour, whatever. It doesn't matter. But somebody could find that video tomorrow, next week, 3 months from now. You don't have to sit there and personally explain the same thing to every person. That video can do part of the work for you. Okay. Same with an email, same with a website, same with a digital product, same with a training video, same with an automated follow-up. That's leverage. I don't think most of us were ever taught about leverage when we were growing up. We were taught about labor, right? Work hard, stay late, pick up another shift. And again, there's nothing wrong with hard work. I believe in hard work, but there's a difference between working hard and making your work multiply. Those are two different things. I think that's one of the biggest things people our age need to understand about building something online. Okay, it's not really about the internet. It's about leverage. The internet is simply a tool, and automation is another one of those words that can sound more complicated than it actually is. People hear automation and picture some giant computer system with robots running around it. It can be incredibly simple. Somebody asks for information. Instead of you manually sending it every single time, the information gets sent automatically. Somebody joins your email list. Instead of you remembering to follow up with them on Tuesday morning, an email is already scheduled. Somebody buys something, the delivery happens automatically. That's automation. It's basically saying, why am I doing this same job over and over again if technology can handle that part, right? And there's another side of this that I don't think gets talked about enough. Automation isn't only about making more money. Sometimes the greatest thing automation gives you is time, okay? If something saves you 15 minutes a day, that doesn't sound impressive. 15 minutes, big deal. But 15 minutes a day, it is over 90 hours a year, okay? That's more than 2 full 40-hour work weeks just from 15 minutes a day. Now imagine saving an hour a day. That starts to become real time. Time you can spend with your family, time you can use to learn something, time you can spend outside, time you can travel, or maybe just time where nobody needs anything from you. That sounds pretty good to me. And I think this becomes more important as we get older. When you're 25, you think you have unlimited Tuesdays. You don't really think about it, right? There's always another summer, another Christmas, another weekend, another vacation. Then somewhere along the way, you start realizing, no, these things are numbered, right? And I don't mean that in some depressing way. I actually think it's useful because once you understand that time has value, you start making different decisions with it. You stop asking only, how much money can I make? And you start asking, what is this costing me in time? That's a very different question because you can have something that pays you really well, but consumes almost your entire life. Is it a good deal? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on what you value. But at least we should be asking the question. And here's something else I think that Gen X has going for us that we sometimes overlook, and that's experience. A lot of people our age look at technology and think the younger generation has this huge advantage. And technically, sure, they grew up with it. They're comfortable with apps. They're comfortable with social media. They can probably figure out a new phone before we finish taking it out of the box. Okay, I'll give them that. But we have something they don't have yet, 30 or 40 years of life experience. We understand people. We've worked with difficult bosses. We've dealt with customers. We've made mistakes. We've had relationships. We've had good years and bad years. We've probably lost people we care about. We've had to figure things out when there wasn't a YouTube tutorial explaining exactly what to do. That matters because business is still people. Marketing is still people, right? People have problems. People want solutions. People want to feel understood, right? Technology doesn't change that. The tools change. Human nature really hasn't changed that much. And I think that's where somebody in their 40s, 50s, or even in their 60s can actually have an advantage. Look, you don't need to dance on TikTok. You don't need to pretend you're 22 years old, right? You don't need to know every new platform. You need to understand somebody's problem and communicate clearly. That has always worked. Okay. It worked 50 years ago and it works today. The delivery mechanism changed. That's about it, guys. Now, there's one thing I think people need to be careful about when they start looking at an online business, right? And that's believing everything they see because the internet can make everything look ridiculously easy. Somebody records a 30-second video beside a Lamborghini and suddenly they're teaching financial freedom. Come on. We need to use a little common sense here. Building something still takes work. You still have to learn, right? You still have to practice. You still have to get things wrong, right? You're going to make videos nobody watches. You're going to write emails nobody opens. You're going to post something you think is brilliant and it's only going to get like 3 likes. One of them might be your wife. That's business. That doesn't mean it isn't working. It means you're learning. And this is another thing I think gets harder for us as we get older. We don't like being beginners. When you've spent 30 years becoming competent at things, suddenly being terrible at something again is very uncomfortable. I thought about this a lot. When you're young, you expect to be bad at things. You try something, you mess up, whatever, right? But when you're 50, you almost feel like you should know everything already. You just started. You wouldn't sit down at a piano for the first time and expect to play Beethoven, right? Why do we expect that with business or marketing or technology? You learn it one piece at a time. And that brings me to probably one of the most useful things I've learned. You don't need to learn everything, guys. I think that stops a lot of people. They start looking at online business and suddenly they see websites, funnels, email marketing, content creation, social media, SEO, automation, AI, and their brain goes, nope, too much. But you don't need to know all of that today. Okay. You need to take the next step. That's it. What do I need to learn next? Learn that. Then move forward. I actually think that's how most things in life work. We just forget it. Nobody learned to drive by studying every road in North America first. You learned how to start the car, how to stop the car, how to turn, how to park, hopefully how to park. Some people are still working on that one. And eventually you become comfortable. Business works the same way, guys. You build skills and skills stack. Okay. Learning how to make a basic video is a skill. Learning how to explain an idea clearly is a skill, right? Learning how email works is a skill. Learning how to use AI properly is definitely a skill. Learning how to automate simply repetitive jobs is a skill, guys. One skill by itself may not change very much, but stack 5 or 6 useful skills together, now you've got something. And one of the things I like about learning these skills is nobody can really take them away from you. A company can take your position away, an industry can change, a business can fail, a platform can disappear. But if you know how to communicate, market, sell, create content, build relationships, use technology, you can take those skills somewhere else. That's security. Okay, maybe a different kind of security than we grew up believing in. Our parents might have thought security meant having the same job for 30 years. Maybe today security means having skills that gives you options. I think that's worth considering. And here's another thing. I don't think you need 8 hours a day to start building something, okay? I think this is where people get stuck. They think, I'm already working all day. When am I supposed to start another business? And that's a fair question. But what if you didn't need another 8 hours a day? What if you had 2 focused hours? Not 2 hours scrolling, not 2 hours with the television on while you're half working, right? 2 actual focused hours. You'd be surprised what you can get done. Maybe 30 minutes learning, maybe 30 minutes creating something, 30 minutes following up or checking your numbers, 30 minutes improving something you already built. That's 2 hours. Do that consistently for a year. That's over 700 hours, guys. 700 hours learning and building something. Okay. Now that's a lot. And I think consistency beats intensity almost every time. People get excited. They work 10 hours on a Saturday, 12 hours on a Sunday. Monday comes and they're exhausted. Then they don't touch the business for 2 weeks. That's not sustainable. Okay. I'd rather do a little every day, build the habit, keep moving, because this isn't supposed to become another thing that owns your life. Okay. At least I don't think it should. The whole point of building something with leverage and automation is eventually giving yourself more control over your time. If you build a business that requires you to be available every waking moment, congratulations, you built yourself another job and maybe a worse boss. So I think we have to keep asking ourselves what we're actually trying to create. Is it just more money or is it more choices? For me, I think choice is a better word. The choice to take a day off, the choice to travel, the choice to spend an afternoon with somebody you care about, the choice not to panic if something changes at work, right? The choice to retire when you want instead of when somebody's spreadsheet says you can't, right? That's powerful, guys. And none of this happens overnight. Now, that's another thing that we need to be realistic about. You plant something, you water it, you learn, you adjust, you keep going. Eventually, you look back and realize something exists that wasn't there before. A skill, an audience, an email list, a library of content, a business. You have options now, whatever it is, but it starts small. Most worthy things do. And maybe that's really the thought I want to share with you. Okay. I don't think Gen X missed the boat. I hear people say that sometimes. I should have started earlier. I should have bought Bitcoin. I should have started YouTube 10 years ago. I should have done this or I should have done that. Okay, maybe. But unless somebody has figured out how to build a time machine in their garage, none of that helps us very much. We're here, right? Today. Everything we screwed up, everything we've survived, and however much time we have ahead of us. So the question isn't really, what should I have done 20 years ago? Okay. The better question is, what can I start learning now to give me more options 5 years from now? Now, that's a useful question because 5 years is going to pass either way. And I think sometimes at our age, we underestimate how much can change in those 5 years. Think about it. 5 years of learning, 5 years of building, 5 years of improving, 5 years of making connections, 5 years of creating something. That can change a lot, guys. It doesn't have to be dramatic, okay? It doesn't have to be some giant leap. Most of the time, it probably won't be. It's just putting one brick down, then another, then another. And eventually, you've built something. That's kind of how our generation was raised. Anyways, do the work, figure things out. The difference now is we can combine that old school work ethic with tools that our parents could never imagine. And I think that combination is pretty powerful. Experience on one side, technology on the other, maybe that's where the opportunity is for us. Not pretending the old rules still work exactly the same way and not throwing everything we've learned away either. Take the good stuff with us, work ethic, patience, common sense, responsibility, and combine it with the new tools, automation, the internet, digital skills, AI, content, and maybe build something that gives us a little more control over what the next chapter looks like. Because I don't think most of us are looking to become billionaires. I really don't. I think that most people just want to know they're going to be okay. They want some breathing room. They want more time, right? They want to travel a little. They want to help their family. They want to stop feeling like one unexpected bill could knock everything sideways. They want options. And when you strip away all the flashy stuff people put around on online business, I think that's what a lot of this is really about. Options. And at our age, options are worth it.